Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar from Wilco Tech and Phoenix TS. I'm Chris Will, I'm Director of Commercial Solutions here at Wilco Tech. We'll be demystifying the 8140.03 for you today, providing essential insights for individuals, agencies, and contractors. Our presenter is Laura Adaletta, who is our product manager for our CyberStar product. And I'm going to hand the floor over to her.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. And just a quick notice that this webinar is being recorded. Ned or Guy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that link will be, and the slide deck will be shared after the presentation for anyone who wants to share or rewatch. I know this will be thoroughly entertaining. So I'll give another maybe 1 minute to get started. I do like to get going on time here, but I know we're just at 12 o'clock. So welcome to anyone new joining. Happy officially afternoon. Thank you for joining us on your lunch hour. All right, I will go ahead and get started here. So thank you, good afternoon, and thank you to Phoenix TX for hosting us on this really timely topic. Really appreciate all of you for joining us today, sitting through on your lunch break here. Hopefully you'll get a little break afterwards. But as I mentioned just before, if you're just joining us, this webinar will be recorded. It is being recorded, and we will share materials after the presentation. So I'm excited to walk through DCWF framework with you today. I'm going to highlight some considerations for planning your transition from 8570 to 8140.03, and the goal is to get as many of your questions answered after the presentation as I can. We'll be using the Q&A dialog box at the top of your screen. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, Chris will be monitoring that window for me, and he'll interrupt if there's anything sort of timely or hold any sort of broad questions for the Q&A section at the end of this presentation. Chris, I know I mentioned that. Don't be afraid to interrupt me. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Laura Adaletta, and I am the product manager for CyberStar. This is our flagship 8140 compliance software here at Wilco Tech. We are the largest provider of 8570 and 8140 cyber workforce management solutions in the Department of Defense. We've got over 1 million users in organizations from the Army to fourth estate agencies and commercial DIB enterprises. So in my role as product manager, I work across pretty much all the functions in our business, but especially I coordinate with the development team to build and improve the CyberStar product. We'll be looking at that a little bit later, just briefly. So this is primarily focused on the policy. But I'm also really at the front lines talking to compliance managers. I'm sure, I know that there are some of you on this call who are sort of tasked with the management of your cyber workforce compliance. And my job in that capacity is really to understand where your pain points are in cyber workforce management. I also frequently interact with the DoD CIO's Workforce Innovation Directorate team to help bridge their strategy with our product strategy, so that all those details on the way that the federal cyber workforce actually understands and implements the policy can be managed efficiently in our application. So in other words, you can think of me as a customer technology advocate who happens to nerd out on reading policy documents. So I wore my big thick glasses to kind of show. So today we're going to talk about a few big picture things you need to know as you begin to implement your plan to achieve 8140 compliance. Namely, what does the policy actually say? What's the timeline on which you'll be operating? What are a key few differences between the IA and the DCWF frameworks? And then, like I said, a brief look at our management system, CyberStar. We'll also dive into some of the details that you'll need to hammer out in order to meet these regulations efficiently and effectively. So for example, how will you access DoD position and personnel source data? What activities might the cyber workforce be able to manage on their own to reduce workload? and what will you be expected to report out. So we'll get into all of these throughout this presentation. Firstly, a little bit about Wilco Tech. Essentially, why should you trust us on this topic? So at Wilco Tech, our mission across all of our business activities and our products is to strengthen national security and workforce readiness for federal cybersecurity personnel. We are not custom software developers. Rather, we have a dedicated team focused on bringing our SaaS product, CyberStar. We also have a legacy sister product called IA-Star. So we're focused on bringing that to market to serve the needs of this really critical industry and manage its growing complexity. We've got 20 years of experience managing cyber workforce compliance for the Army and U.S. Coast Guard. Under the legacy 8570 framework, CyberStar was developed specifically for the transition to 8140, and we've got well over 1 million active users on our products. CyberStar is FedRAMP in process in review with the PMO office, and we have active contracts with DoD branch, Fourth Estate, and DIB organizations. Also worth noting, we are a registered small business and headquartered here in Akron, Ohio. So coming at you from Northeast Ohio today. If you are brand new to the DCWF framework, here's a quick overview of the policy and why it matters. If you've been diving into the regs for a while now, feel free to go ahead and check your email or your news feed. DCWF stands for the Department of Defense Cyber Workforce Framework. It's a new methodology intended to help resolve some of the more costly and persistent cyber talent gap issues. Probably chief among these are, how do you really know whether the person you've hired for a critical cyber role is actually qualified to do the job, not just pass a test or took a training? And how can we attract and keep more talented cyber personnel in the DoD? In particular, those who might not have earned advanced degrees or certifications. So the key is to standardize these roles to the actual skills needed to do the job, and then track and measure these skills throughout their career life cycle. So this also contributes to a more level playing field and helps over time eliminate pay disparities in which, say, a contractor doing the same job as a serviceman or woman could earn about 15% more because their role is simply coded differently. So there are now in the DCWF framework 71 work roles, each with 3 proficiency levels from basic to intermediate and advanced. And all of these work roles are categorized into 7 broad elements or categories. Fun fact, there are about 37,000 cyber roles within the DoD that have either turned over annually or are vacant. Obviously, this leaves our nation's defense system vulnerable to increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks and endangers our ability to prepare and defend against cyber warfare. It's really critical that we use the time and talents of our existing workforce as efficiently and effectively as possible, and that we continue to make progress toward closing this gap. Okay, so DoD 8140 is not all that new. The first directive, 8140-01, was actually signed all the way back in 2015, and then it was updated to 8140-02 in 2020. Let's not think too hard about that year. But up until February of last year, the policy was mostly just a repackaging of 8570. However, once that 8140-03 manual was published, and that was, I'm trying to use my little laser pointer here. Here we go. We really saw a massive shift in the way that the DoD was thinking about cyber work roles and the various ways in which the workforce itself could and should become qualified to perform their roles. So this is far beyond the handful of certificates that qualified folks in cybersecurity and IT roles under the 8570 framework. Now, last month, the CIO's office issued a tasker mandating that all components report on 8140 data by January 3rd of this coming year. We'll talk about this report a little bit later in the presentation, but also the next deadline you should be aware of is February 15th, at which point all civilian and military affiliated personnel coded to one of the 13 cybersecurity workforce element roles must be qualified to their work role. So here are the roles you'll see under that cybersecurity work role element. Each of these and the other roles in all the other elements have a corresponding qualification matrix that is published by the Workforce Innovation Directorate, or WID, WID. Sometimes we love the acronyms. And those qualification matrices spell out exactly how to become qualified to this role. So they outline, which skills, which certifications, training, education, et cetera, that you can use to become qualified to demonstrate your proficiency to that role. We're going to look at one of those matrices in a little bit. I just want to kind of continue on this timeline here. So that first wave, as I mentioned, that February 15th date of 2025 only covers those 13 cybersecurity work roles. There's a second wave that's coming a year later in February 2026. And that one has a lot of additional work roles categorized under the elements cyberspace, which includes cyberspace enablers, IT cyberspace, cyberspace effects, intelligence cyberspace, and also software engineering. So that second wave will be a lot bigger. It gives everyone a little more time. There is also a data and AI work role element. Currently, there's no defined due date or qualification matrices for these yet. I know you're probably dying for more, but for the moment, these are now still officially TBD. Probably we'll see those qualification requirement deadlines hit in February of 2027. We are also aware that you may see or will see additional work roles added to other elements along the way. For instance, I think there are a handful of new work roles expected to be added to the Cyber Exchange library by the end of this year. So, these are subject to change, the matrices themselves, but also the elements and the work roles underneath them. It's important to note here that currently the 8140 policy currently impacts only civilian and military affiliated personnel. So until the report on the DFARS rule is released, and so far it's gotten pushed out pretty frequently this year, contractors are not yet subject to the new regulations. We did hear from the Workforce Innovation Directorate group a couple of weeks ago that it's likely that the Defense Industrial Base will also have 24 months to code and comply with these work role requirements, just as the DoD components had. However, when that language is updated, when those requirements hit, contractors must be qualified at the commencement of work. So this is in contrast to civilians and military personnel who, once they're assigned to a role, they have 6 to 9 months to complete their work role qualification requirements. If you're a contractor, you've got to be qualified immediately. All right, so excuse me. At this point, you've heard me say qualified about a dozen times. So let's briefly unpack what that means. Excuse me one moment. So here is one of those work role qualification matrices I mentioned earlier. Now, this is just a template, obviously, but it's a great illustration for the way that the regulation is structured. Each work role has essentially 3 tranches to demonstrate qualification. First, and this is the qualification requirement you should be working toward for this coming February 15th deadline in those 13 cybersecurity work roles. But each role has a foundational qualification option. So personnel can use either a technical degree. This degree has to be in one of about a half dozen fields. So things like computer engineering, data science, English degrees and psych degrees are excellent, but not qualifying here. They also have to come from a cyber accredited institution. And there's a lot more detail about which programs qualify in the matrices themselves. So they can use that education option. They can use an authorized training option. So those are sort of all published in these matrices as well, or a commercial or military certification. So if none of these actually apply, civilians and military affiliated personnel can apply for an experience waiver. That's that foundational qualification alternative section here. which is essentially a skills assessment that the user would fill out, submit, and then that's reviewed and approved, usually by a board. So once those foundational requirements are met, then come residential qualifications here. And these are made up of two parts. The first is on-the-job qualifications and trainings. And the second is environment-specific requirements. So more of like the actual systems in which users might be working. So for the most part, there hasn't been a ton of progress on this front yet within the DoD. Everyone is still pretty focused on coding and foundational compliance. But the residential qualifications will be primarily component defined. So based on the organization, the office in which the user sits, their level of access, and the role that the person might hold. So those are going to be pretty variable as opposed to the foundational qualifications, which is just boom from this list. And then lastly, there are continuous professional development requirements, or CPD hours, required annually once the personnel has achieved both foundational and residential compliance. This is 20 hours per year, but any continuing education required to maintain certifications, for instance, can count toward this requirement. So that is when we talk about the work role matrices and how a user becomes qualified. All of this package must be met for the person to be fully qualified for their role. All right. And I just see a question about, is this webinar recorded? Yes, it is being recorded. Everyone will receive a copy of this, as well as these slides we can send out as well. Thanks for the question. All right, so now let's look at some of the differences between 8570 and 8140, particularly as it relates to the level of complexity in managing all of this data. So under the old IA framework, or 8570, there were a total of 14 unique work roles. And those were made up of 4 different roles with various proficiency levels or specialty areas. So, a couple of different roles with those proficiency levels or specialties created a total of 14. If you were assigned to one of these 14 roles, you could become qualified through just a handful of allowable certificates. So just like that, you're good to go. You get an A+ certificate and you are qualified. If you had elevated access needs, you might have a few additional requirements, but pretty simple and fairly simple to manage. Although, it's always easier to say that than in actual practice. But largely, DoD components were managing 81 or 8570 with spreadsheets. And even then, at sort of scale, that does get a little complex and messy. So under 8140, this is where we really start to see the breakdown of a spreadsheet management system. So there's a massive increase in complexity under 8140. So now there are 71 defined work roles with 3 proficiency levels each. So that's a total of 228 unique sets of requirements compared to 14 under 8570. And then these work roles are defined in the matrices like we just saw, with qualifications broken down into those 2 primary categories of foundational and residential. On the one hand, this provides more flexibility for personnel, which is a good thing, but it takes a lot more mental gymnastics for administrators. So where previously the workforce was just kind of blanket required to hold one of several certificates, compliance can now be met using, as we talked about, certificates, training, an accredited higher education degree, or that experience assessment. Positions can also have up to 3 distinct work roles. So one individual in your organization can have multiple qualification matrices that they need to comply with. And in addition, those users who aren't already assigned to an advanced role, so let's say you're at a basic or an intermediate proficiency area, you can actually use any of the higher level qualification options to become qualified, which again, just increases the complexity of tracking and managing that if you are tasked with your cyber workforce compliance. I did touch on skills a little earlier. 8140 regulations define and track more than 2,000 distinct knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks, that's those KSATs, that the workforce must be proficient in to perform their work role duties. We will see in the coming years the DoD shifting more toward those KSATs, for instance, looking at skills gaps as opposed to job gaps or role gaps. So less about like, I don't have enough IT managers, and more about I don't have enough people who are qualified to do some of the skills, the highly skilled work that can often be part of an IT manager's job. All right, phew. So we've talked about that growing complexity. Let's just briefly look at an illustrative example. So here is an 8570 qualification matrix. That's the whole thing for someone coded to an IASAE 2 work role. So as long as they have one of these 4 certificates and they renew on schedule, they're compliant. There is a similar DCWF security architect work role at the level 2 proficiency level here. And I do want to take a moment to point out that not all roles map neatly. So if you are still in the coding journey of your transition from 8570 to 8140, some of those crosswalk very nicely. Some of them are much harder to kind of align with, hey, I had someone in this 8570 work role. There's not a really clear match for 8140. That is a challenge, but there are, people who have gone through that before. So, if you are trying to find more resources or advice, reach out and we can help connect you if that's something that your team is currently struggling with. So in this DCWF security architect role, the personnel, as we reviewed, can choose from one of 4 certificates, that's these up here, or they can choose a 4-year degree, or they can select from a full list of qualified trainings. All of those things are, all of those training certification options are reviewed by the DoD and authorized. So you can't, for instance, just add a new qualification. That comes through the Workforce Innovation Directorate as approved for the qualification matrix. So that's sort of another separate document that has all of those training options. Again, or they can request an experiential qualification alternative, which is board reviewed before approval. And then once those are met, they've got to meet their OJT requirements. These are common for everyone in this work role across the DoD, as well as a set of environment-specific requirements, which is component defined. So, your organization could say, well, we want anyone in this type of work role to take, to sign this agreement or to take this additional supplementary training. So it's going to be different depending on who you report to. That variability, again, introduces another layer of complexity to tracking. Once both those foundational and residential requirements are met, then the personnel's got to meet that 20-hour CPD annual requirement. So if you are in the hot seat to help develop or manage your DoD component strategy for these regulations, or you're a leader in the DIB looking to get ahead of contract requirements, you may be wondering, how am I going to execute on all this? So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about some management tools as well as other systems that you may need to link with in this 8140 compliance landscape. So for 8140 compliance management, you will need at a minimum the ability to manage work roles and proficiencies, keep qualification matrices updated along with the cyber workforce qualification program changes. So basically, as I mentioned before, new work roles are added, matrices are updated, all of that stuff impacts how a person's compliance standing is calculated. So that is something that will need to be, kind of agile in your management. You've also got to be able to maintain a record of users' individually earned or assessed qualifications. So which certifications do they have? When do they expire? Which assessments have been approved or rejected, etc. And you'll need to manage those variable residential requirements we talked about, as well as the kind of day-to-day keeping all of your workforce's position, personnel, and contract records up to date from authoritative systems. You will also be required under 8140 to integrate with and report out to the Advana system in the CIO's office there. That's annual requirement. Although right now during the transition, that policy requirement has been sort of downgraded to allow a manual process of like export. That's that data call that was sent out October 1st. So it will be manual kind of during the transition until they are ready for those incoming connections to Advana. But just know that that is coming. All right, so we're talking about systems for management here because I think probably we're all on the same page at this point that you know, a spreadsheet is going to be not responsive enough to manage the complexities of this system. So one of the first decisions you're going to need to make before you choose a solution is, do you build it or do you buy it? Now, I could talk through a whole separate webinar on this topic alone, but to scratch the surface here, we know that the DoD's strategic preference is for commercial off-the-shelf or COTS procurement. And broadly speaking, there's about 5 points you need to consider when you make a decision about how your organization is going to handle this. So how long will it take to have something usable? What's the total cost of ownership over the life of the product? What are your must-have features and functionality? What knowledge and expertise do you have in your organization? Or will you have to kind of supplement? What are your core competencies? And, you know, frankly, is building software one of them? Or is it a distraction? And I find this interesting. You know, every year I think these numbers shift just a little bit, but they've always been pretty abysmal. The current success rate for modernizing government IT projects is 13%. So, you know, we obviously have a vested stake in commercial off-the-shelf solutions being kind of the go-to choice, but I think there's a lot of evidence that shows when you've got a team that's really focused exclusively on this particular use case, you can benefit a lot from that. I am going to take just a couple of minutes to show you Wilco's CyberStar system. This was purpose-built for 8140 compliance. It's COTS software, comes turnkey with predictable upfront pricing, regular new feature development, maintenance and support, a US-based expert help desk. We are also offering certification validation service for select vendors. That's an add-on component, but as well as sort of baked into the product is all those live regulatory updates. So when a matrix changes, when a new work role is added, when something shifts in the policy, the system is automatically updated for you. So that's just a task that your compliance management team does not have to manage. And again, I mentioned at the start of the webinar that we are also FedRAMP in process. So hopefully a little easier on the procurement and RMF management end going forward. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. I'm going to switch over to our demo environment. And Chris, if you've got any questions.
Yeah, if anyone's got a question to share in the chat, I'm happy to raise those to Laura.
All right, can I get, Chris, an audible confirmation that you can see my overview screen here?
I sure can.
Great, thanks. Teams makes it a little bit tricky when you're not using their live share. Okay, so I'm going to show you impersonation mode really briefly. I'm going to go over here to personnel, and I'm going to walk through a couple of things on my own account, but I think it's helpful to kind of view this feature. So I can, in anyone in my personnel roster, I can view their profile as if I am the user. So this is available to people managers and system admins. Pretty handy to have the ability to, see what your users are seeing. as well as in this capacity here, you can manage uploads and approvals on behalf of the user if you wish. Otherwise, this system is a pretty self-service component using CyberStar. So this is what a general user would see. They'd have an overview page here, kind of with status and due dates, any of their tasks and to-dos. You can see which qualifications that I have submitted might be in pending verification. This user has none at the moment, and then their compliance standing for the various groups that they might belong to. I'm going to go back to my record just to kind of show you. And again, I will note that this is a demo environment, so you can see some, silly titles and things that don't make sense for the policy. This is just a testing and demonstration environment. So if I did not have advanced permissions and a role in the application, you would not see any of the menu options below this leadership category here. You just see that those limited menu items like we just saw in impersonation mode. But in my overview page, this is the home screen that I go to anytime I sign into the application. I can see my to-do list, and this is all of my compliance tasks. So I've clearly let my basic cyber awareness training lapse, and I'm out of compliance for that. And I've also been assigned to a technical support specialist role, but here my status is deferred, and I'm not out of compliance until that deadline of February 2026 hits. But I can still pursue all the requirements early if I have them. So let's really quickly submit a new cyber awareness certificate. And you can see here, there's details about the expired qualification that I might have. There's also the ability to configure these qualifications with instructions for the user, so you don't have to answer the calls or send emails about go here, follow this link, etc. All of this can be embedded right in the point of to do. And then I will just add my qualification here. Let's say I actually earned this yesterday, and I will choose. I will choose a sample certificate here to upload. And I might say like, whoops, sorry for missing the deadline. And I'm gonna save that. And now you can see that's left my to-do list and jump down into the pending verification column here. So I know that this is on somebody else's plate for the moment. All right, so I'm also in a good spot because I am already a Security Plus certification holder. So I've been assigned to this work role. I'm not actually required to be compliant to it yet, but good news, I can go ahead and submit what I do have. So let's press that here. And again, I enter this form to fill out my information. This is pre-selected based on my selection from the previous screen. And I can put in here my certificate ID. Say my completion date was October 4th of 2024. And my expiration date would be, let's see, October 30th of 2027. I think these are 3-year certificates. So again, I would upload my certificate, leave an optional comment, and save it. And again, now my to-do list is totally empty, and pending verification has both of those certificates. So let's look at the admin view. I am taking off my general user hat and putting on my admin hat here. And now I can see, oh, look, I've got a notification here that there are new qualifications in my compliance review queue. Oh, look, those are both of the qualifications that I've just submitted. There is actually an option to enable or disable sort of self-review. So if you're a member of the compliance team, you also have qualification requirements to do. Your organization can say, don't let Laura review her own qualifications, make somebody else assigned to this role do it, or you know what, we're fine with it. So when I click one of these things, it will drop down the qualification details that I've just submitted. Maybe I can see in the user submission, she left out, a certification ID, or I've looked at the certificate, and I'm actually seeing that the expiration date is November 7th. My completion date is November 7th today, not the 6th. So I can make that change for the user. And I'll say, oops, that's the user's comment. And then I will save that edit there. And then I can go back in and say updated completion date. And you can see here all of the comment activity on the qualification is saved. So I'm going to verify this qualification. So I'll show you what that looks like on the user's side in just a moment. And then let's say I look through this other certificate that I've submitted, and actually I have a problem verifying this. Let's say, for instance, I earned the certificate under a maiden name and my name has changed. I can say, please update with name change, and I can reject this here. I get a confirmation. And now my qualification compliance review queue is empty, but then back on the user's view, that rejected qualification jumped back in my to-do list, and then I can cure that. So whatever issues there might have been, I can change that, resubmit it for verification, but nothing else is in pending verification. And great, now that I've met that cyber awareness challenge requirement, I'm now compliant. Great news. Okay, so just briefly want to point out here, there are lots of configuration options available to system admins, qualifications, various work roles, etc. As I mentioned before, all of the DCWF and the 8570 framework configurations come out of the box with CyberStar, so those are managed on your behalf. But you can also create custom work roles and requirements through configuration settings. So let's say, for instance, that the DoD qualification matrix for an 8140 work role has a ton of training options that you don't necessarily want your workforce to be able to take. You can modify that version of the work role and make it, it then becomes a custom framework for your preferences for your agency. So I'm going to just kind of briefly show you what that looks like. Let's say that's 902 here. There's a bunch of different options under here. You may want to say, actually, we want to pull one of these out of here. This is a bad example. There's some of these work roles are not either configured because of the demo environment or because of the element might be a little further along. So let's take a look at 611 here. Right, so you might want to be able to, like, hey, we don't want anyone to be able to request a qualify using a particular certificate for whatever reason. Okay, so those again, those customizations and configurations are available to system admins. There's also a group settings page here. So this is basically my organization's groups and offices, and there's parent nesting structures here. So this information is also configurable for admin. So you can add groups, you can change parent and child relationships, etc. And then the groups themselves have information like what's the group name and ID, who if there's a description for the group, if there are any work roles specific to that group, say actually there's someone in acquisitions here, and anyone in the acquisition group might need an additional user agreement or training. You can customize that here. So there's a lot of flexibility that cascades directly to the user's compliance to-do list and their compliance calculations. That would impact everyone across the group if I made an update to this screen here. All right, and then the most of the daily tasks for my work as a compliance manager are sort of in the next few pages here. So I know I briefly showed the personnel page. This is really all of my, all of the people kind of in my organization that are assigned to me. So you can manage that. Like I'm a manager across all groups, or I'm a manager of only one or several groups. So this list would be limited to people that you are authorized to oversee. But then, you know, I can view and edit and keep updated these user records. And that can be done either one-on-one directly in the interface here, or it can be done in bulk through an importer tool. So this is especially helpful if you're receiving, for instance, regular exports from your manpower and personnel source systems. So you can, you know, the data in our importer is formatted to reflect those systems of record. So you can push a couple buttons, update those records the way that they come out of those source systems to your team. And this is also true for position data. Oops, excuse me, can't hit the right button. So each position has associated work roles, and you can use any framework here, 8140, 8570, those custom work roles that we talked about. I can add something here. So let's say I've got, you know, IT data architect role here. In these positions, you can have up to 3 work roles, and they're designated in an order: primary, secondary, tertiary. Let's say this position should actually have the data architect role as the primary. I can just drag and drop that, and it updates for that user. And then that's helpful really for reporting when you want to say, show me the compliance to everyone assigned a primary work role. I know in particular that's what the DoD CIO's report is looking for in that October data call. So you know, you just press save, and then the position would be updated. I've also got some dashboard and reporting capabilities. Obviously, the dashboard is a really top-down view of your staff's compliance. And I will note that this dashboard is relatively new and is developing pretty rapidly. So, you know, if you see this in a month, there's likely to be a lot more. But here it's just kind of a top-down view. What's my total staff? What is their compliance posture for everyone who has a DCWF work role? I can look at compliance by work role, by element. So, hey, I'm really concerned about cybersecurity. Turns out there's actually no records under my management in this demo environment. So if I'm missing users, for instance, it would just not show up. But you can see that compliance by work role, and then you can see a list of your non-compliant users sort of in real time of the moment. And then obviously reporting is a huge part of the value of CyberStar for compliance. So let's look briefly in particular at that DoD 8140 qualification reporting template. So this is the one I mentioned. You know, there's that data call that came out from the CIO's office, and components will be required to report out according to that template by January 3rd. So for CyberStar users, this comes pre-configured to that requested data tasker. You know, just to kind of show you briefly, excuse me, again, because this is a demo environment, you're not seeing things like EDIPI, and there's some sort of wonky data here. But all of this, once you press the button, spit it out. I'm going to cancel because this is making edits to the report. But if I just generate this, you know, press this button, and I have a CSV file downloaded that gives me all that information that the CIO's office is requesting. But it is also easy to kind of add any configuration of custom reports depending on your needs. So, you know, if I created a new report here, let's say I wanted to look at work roles and group assignments. I can just title that there. Maybe I give a reason of why I created this, and then I can optionally share this with other system managers. So if this is a report I think we might use frequently, you know, this will save it and make it available to others to just generate that CSV file, you know, or you can say no, and it's just available to you. And then you can add, you know, filters. So, you know, I want to only see active users. And for instance, I want to see only people who are in the group, you know, AF Squadron 352. And I check that button, and then that limits my data set here. Want to add, you know, a work role. I want to see the work role ID and work role name, and whether it's primary, secondary, or tertiary, right? And so then this gives me a little preview here, and I can save that. And now that new report is available for download. All right, so that is really just scratching the surface with CyberStar. I'm going to switch back here quickly to my presentation. I want to make sure we have some time for questions, so I'm just going to switch back here and open this up for some questions. And I know that there's a few DISA folks on the call today, so just want to quick shout out. You know, DISA is our most recent customer. We're currently working on onboarding and all the RMF red tape. But I know that their leadership considered a number of options for managing 8140. We're super honored they chose CyberStar and really looking forward to working together. So hello. With that, I'll open it up to any questions, and also want to leave some contact information here on the screen in case anyone has some offline questions or wants to follow up. And then I mentioned a couple times we are going to share this webinar recording and the slides with everyone. So there's some additional resources and supplemental slides afterwards that might be helpful to you too.
Hey, Laura, we've got a question.
Great.
Basically, the question is, and I've answered it in the chat, but I want to confirm it with you because I believe my answer is correct. So if you have a degree but no certification,
yep,
does that qualify you as a level 3? Now, I wasn't quite sure what they mean by level 3, but basically my answer, and you can confirm this, is that my understanding is that a relevant degree qualifies if it's been attained in the last 5 years for foundational qualification, or could qualify.
Yeah, great question. And I'm pretty sure I'll jump in and correct me if I've gotten this wrong, but the level 3 is I believe referring to the proficiency level. So if you are in an advanced role, actually you are correct. If you look at those work roles published by the DoD, there initially was a qualifying degree in there. So for instance, some of them used to be like an associate degree at the beginning and intermediate level, and then like a bachelor's or a advanced degree at that advanced proficiency level. Those did disappear this year from those published matrices. Like I said, that policy is subject to change at any time. I know that the question has come up multiple times, and I believe that the long-term intention is that, yes, there will be advanced degree qualification options for those work roles that have advanced proficiency levels. Right now, they're not in the published matrix. So, this is still sort of one of those gray areas where the policy itself and then the implementation can be a little bit at odds. I think it's a good question if you are looking at an active workforce in those cybersecurity work roles. That's a great question for the Workforce and Innovation Directorate team. You can reach out to Chris, who can connect you to me. We field a lot of these questions kind of regularly, but unfortunately don't have a really solid answer on what that will look like in the coming months. Hopefully that was helpful / not helpful.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
There's another question. There is an ISSM role identified, but ISSO, this is in quotations, is not. Is it forecasted for that to be updated? That strikes me like that would be a job role within the 8140 job role.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I believe the ISSO roles were common to the 8570 framework. And again, that might be, apologies, I'm having a difficult time recalling that specific work role, but that may be one of those examples of, sometimes that crosswalk from 8570 to 8140 isn't super clean. This slide deck has, I mentioned this resource slide here, and there is an 8140 documents library and qualification matrices for all those roles. This work role tool also has all of the published work roles. Like I said, I can't recall off the top of my head if that ISSO work role is in there or not. But I think, my familiarity with it so far is just that sometimes it's real close, but not quite a cigar there on the 8570 to 8140. But we are expecting, I think I mentioned this earlier in the call, we are expecting, I think, 6 new work roles to be published by the end of this year or very beginning of next. So, you know, I haven't seen those yet. They're not published, but it could be that that's in that tranche as well.
Yeah, and I think some of those are AI related, right, Laura? Like AI related work roles. So
they may be. I understand that we're going from 71 to 76 or 77 work roles. I don't know which elements they are in. So they might be all AI. They might fall under any of the work role elements. Thus far, I don't have any details other than that they're coming.
absolutely.
And again, sort of another reason why sort of agility to the policy, like having to kind of watch those matrices, check the notifications that are coming from the Workforce Innovation Directorate team. Hey, when there's an update, we need to kind of get all of our materials updated. You know, it's a process.
Great. I'm not seeing any. Oh, wait.
Yeah, I can see something in the chat here. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible that they left out the position to include ISSO duties. Melissa, I really appreciate this question, and it's not one I've had before, which at this point is relatively surprising to me. I know we have a list of registrant emails, but I'm going to do just a little bit of digging and follow up with you on email afterwards. So, you know, it's possible that I might be overlooking something, but you know, I don't have a cyber work role. I've been studying the policy, but the details of the work roles themselves is sort of, a lot of that is managed on the back end of our application or our support desk. So I've gotten a little more distant from that in the recent months. So really appreciate the question though. And I know, you know, there are other slight frustrations with like, hey, this is new policy. So, you know, the common phrase is building the plane as we, or, you know, building the plane as we get it off the ground, or, and, you know, it can be really frustrating to have sort of some of those gaps between like, hey, I'm reading this thing, but I'm kind of understanding our way of working as this other way. You know, what gives? You know, a good example is for civilians who were in 8570 work roles are now coded to 8140. 8570 is no longer being enforced, but in the meantime, those qualification deadlines are, you know, at some points 2 years off. So like, is compliance optional to this point? You know, that's another question. And I think a really big one that hasn't been super satisfactorily answered yet, but I know, you know, everyone's doing their best to kind of manage the seismic shift of this new way of working with the cyber workforce.
Are there
any other questions?
Yeah. Well, Laura, thank you for doing a terrific job as usual. If anybody has additional questions, please reach out to either myself or to Laura, and we will try to get them answered for you. If we don't have the answers, we can usually find them, and we're happy to do that on your behalf. So thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking your lunch hour and spending some time to learn about 8140, and really appreciate it, y'all. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate your time and attention, questions. Like I said, we're here for additional questions and follow up. And again, thanks to Phoenix TS for hosting us here. Always happy to nerd out about policy. So.
And if you need to get in touch with Laura, just reach out to me in this email, and then I will get you in touch with Laura. So.
All right, thanks everybody. Go enjoy a cup of coffee or a sandwich before your next meeting. And have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
I'll hang out for a few here in case there's any last questions, but.
Okay.
Olden, I am typing my email address here in the chat. It is also on the first or second slide of this presentation, which we will share out afterwards. And then, like Chris said, that is the wrong email address. Wow. Okay, I can't type and talk at the same time. Let me try this again. If you have any questions for me, you know, on the product or the connection, the bridge between policy and solutions, Chris's email there or mine, either one, it'll get to me.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks all.